Hey, what's up, y'all? It's N Square Sports back today. We're going through NFL divisions now, so we're going to be doing the AFC South today. One of the more interesting divisions, I think, this year. It's been a pretty bad division last couple years, but I think this year it'll be a pretty good division. So we're going to start with the Texans. They last year went 11-5 and lost in the wild card round to the Colts, a division rival. So I think this year their floor is around 7-9. I think it's possible for Deshaun Watson to get pressured a lot and just not have the offensive line needed, because their offensive line is getting better but still not quite there yet. So I think if the offensive line falls apart, then they could go 7-9. And I think their ceiling is 11-5, just like last year. They have a lot of winnable games that they just will have to go out and get. So it's just going to be kind of waiting and seeing if that offensive line is going to be decent enough for Deshaun Watson to have time to throw. So, Nick, I will let you take the stage and let you rant on the Texans, because I know you would want to. So let's go.
So I'm a huge Houston Texans fan. I actually had their floor at 6-10, and their ceiling is 12-4. He makes pretty much fair points, as they are a very talented team. I mean, it's talent across the board everywhere. There's somebody there. He says about the O-line. The O-line is slightly improving. Pretty much what he said. He nailed it. But if their offense can get to that at least average to 20 range, 20 to that area, I think that this team is pretty much going to be a playoff team. But it all hinges on the secondary and the offensive line. I have them going around 10-6, 11-5, squeaking into the playoffs or barely missing out, because I think the AFC is just really good this year.
Yeah.
They have so many toss-up games when you look up their schedule that it's really hard to predict their season, because you can make a case, honestly, you can make a case for them losing every game and a case for them winning every game. That's just, their schedule is so up in the air. It's very hard, but to be honest, the defenses they play this year are a lot easier than last year. So maybe the offense will improve, but I think the defense is gonna recede.
Interesting. So some players to watch for me: Justin Reed of safety. He had a great year last year, and I think if he can continue to play well and get better, I think he's a huge part of their secondary. Another guy, Kiki Kuti, he's a wide receiver that can go behind DeAndre Hopkins. If he can be even, half of what DeAndre Hopkins is, he's going to be big and pass catching, especially like last year in the playoff game that they did play. He was huge in that game, and if he can just play reasonably well, I think that's going to be a huge help to them. So
Kiki Kuti, just a point about him, and he was pretty much averaging when he was playing like 10 catches a game and almost 100 yards. If not that, it was like 20 yards and a touchdown. I mean, when he was active, he was playing at pretty much an elite level, and he's really not known for his injuries. All through college, he wasn't injured, so I think he's going to have a great year this year. So Justin Reed, completely agree with that. They just cut Dante Foreman, who is the running back 2, so they really don't have running back depth, which is sort of a flaw to their team.
Yeah, and I had him on this list for players to watch, and when I went back and looked, they cut him. I'm like, well, gotta pick somebody else now.
Yeah, so pretty much I got who I think is going to be the RB2 is Karan Higdon. He played for Michigan. He's pretty good back. He's a little undersized, not really good pass blocker, but he's a pretty good runner. So maybe if he can show up, he's an undrafted free agent. He has potential. And one player to watch that I think will honestly determine their season, and this is a big thing, is Bradley Roby. They invested almost $10 million in him. And if he can play at, a pretty good level to where he can be a solid cornerback too, I think this team has potential to at least stop some of the elite offenses they're going to have to face.
Yeah.
And this secondary needs someone. Roby has talent. He's a first-round draft pick. He has speed. He shut down Tyreek Hill last year. He has potential. But he's really inconsistent. So maybe a change of scenery, but the season is really on his hands.
And I actually, that's a good point. I didn't even realize Bradley Roby was even on the Texans until you just said that. But I watched him last year and a couple years ago with the Broncos. He was really good, and I really like him as a player. So that's an interesting point you made. So I'll let you go into some important games for the Texans.
I think, like I said earlier, is that so many of the games are just throw up in the air, and so some of the games that I think will determine their season is the Saints week 1. I think that game is going to be big. I really have them losing that, but I think if they can come in there and at least show up in the Superdome, I think it's going to instill a little bit of confidence. You got both the Colts games, massive games. The one they're at home is going to be a Thursday night game. It's the Colts and the Texans are going to be pretty much rivals for the next 5 to 10 years with Luck and Deshaun Watson. So hopefully these teams can duke it out and get some good games here. Yeah. But if they go 1-1 in this series of 2, I think the division is still going to be up in the air. Yeah. This is going to be the determinant for the division because their records, what I'm projecting, are pretty much 1 game apart. They're so big. And then week 13, Sunday Night Football, primetime in Houston, is the Patriots. It's a massive game to see if they're actually contenders or not. Maybe Deshaun Watson finally squeaks out his victory against Tom Brady. He's been really close the last 2 times, but just can't quite get there.
Yeah, so I have week 3 at the Chargers. You said week 1 at the Saints. That's a big game too. But week 3 at the Chargers, imagine if you lose to the Saints in week 1, and I'm not sure who they play week 2. But let's say they lose their first 2 games and you go at the Chargers, like that would be a huge game going 0-3 versus 1-2. I think week 3 at the Chargers is huge. I agree. Both Colts games are going to be huge, but I think week 7 at the Colts, playing there is right in the middle of the season. That could determine who hops on top of each other for the division to be at number 1 in the division. And then I agree, week 13 and the Patriots versus the Patriots is pretty much gonna be big. That's a big game for sure. So anything else on the Texans you want to mention?
Just quickly say I think they have one of the biggest potentials, but also one of the lowest floors in the whole NFL,
sure.
Which is a little scary as a fan going into the season. But it's going to be fun to watch. This team is really fun.
Yeah, they for sure will. So let's go now to the Indianapolis Colts. They were 10-6 last year, and they lost in the divisional round of the AFC playoffs against the Chiefs. They did beat the Texans in the wild card and then lost in the next week at the Chiefs. I think their floor is 9-7. I'm pretty high on the Colts this year. I think their floor would be 9-7, and their ceiling is around 13-3. With Andrew Luck having a great offensive line and some pretty good wide receiver core and tight end group and a very good defense, I think they basically have everything they need now to compete. So I'm pretty high on them. So what do you think?
I have their floor as 7-9 and their ceiling is 13-3. I think their potential first round or the first seed in the AFC contenders, but I'd have them more around the 11-5 range. That's where I sort of project them to be. The argument for the floor, I'll say, is I could see lots of recession in the new coach, maybe people figuring out the system. Maybe the offensive line takes a little bit of steps down just a little bit. Maybe the defense steps down just a little bit. I can make that argument. Also, their wide receiver core is a little lackluster, and honestly, their offense is a little lackluster in general. Eric Ebron could take a step down. The offense got them wins last year, and I'm afraid that it might go down. But Andrew Luck is a great quarterback, and Frank Wright is a very genius offensive coordinator, or he's a head coach, but he's an offensive mind, very smart. I still think they're going to go 11-5, and they're going to be a really hard team that no one will want to face.
I don't see yet. I'll just have to watch, but I think their offense is still really good. With T.Y. Hilton, really good. Their tight ends, I don't think it really matters if one of their tight ends steps down. They have Jack Doyle coming back. They have Eric Ebron, and Mo Alley Cox was really good last year too. So that's 3 tight ends that one doesn't show up one week, they have others. So I don't think their offense is going to take as much of a step back as you say, but we'll just have to wait and see. So some players for me to watch. I have my main one is Devin Funchess. He's guy who is coming from the Panthers to the Colts as a wide receiver to back up T.Y. Hilton. And he's a big question mark because in Carolina, he was just not really that great all the time. And I think he's a better player than that. I just think maybe some new scenery will help him. And if he can be a great number 2 wide receiver, then you have T.Y. Hilton and Devin Funchess and those 3 tight ends. I think your offense is going to be just fine. So
I think so. I have Devin Funchess as well. I mean, quite frankly, if he's lackluster and sort of how he was last year with the Panthers and just nothing really too special, I don't really see this team improving from last year. I sort of see them staying around the same area. Also, Nyheim Hines, who's the running back 2 behind Marlon Mack. He's more of a pass-catching back than really someone who's going to run between the tackles and all that. I think Marlon Mack is good enough, but he's not a pass catcher. I just want to see how this team involves the running game more. And I mean, the offense, I think Eric Ebron is enough, but he had pretty much a historic season with all the touchdowns he caught. It's statistically bound to recede there.
Yeah,
I don't really trust Mo Alley Cox that much. I mean, he's still pretty raw in talent, and Jack Doyle was injured last year, so he's coming back from an injury. Again, this team, I actually would bet on Andrew Luck getting MVP. So, like, I'm high on them, but then again, I can make the argument that there is some room for recession. So then some of the biggest games they have this season at the Steelers week 9, that can be big and determine playoff seeding. But the Steelers usually dominate the Colts, so we're gonna see, this is gonna be a fun game to watch. And then at Houston, week 12, Thursday Night Football, for previously stated reasons.
Yeah. I also have week 5 at the Chiefs. It's kind of an earlier in the season, going to Kansas City to play. I think that'll be a big game. And then week 15 at the Saints is another big game, playing in a dome. Playoff seeds on the line. I think that'll be a big cross of AFC and NFC. That'll be an interesting one too. Okay, so moving on to the Tennessee Titans. Last year they went 9-7, but did not make the playoffs. It's a pretty good record to not make the playoffs. I'm gonna say their floor this year is 5-11, and their ceiling is 9-7. I think the best they could do is 9-7. I see a lot of regression this year. I think Mariota I just don't think he's that guy. He's had a lot of chances, and I just don't think he's it. I mean, I could be wrong. He could, rise up, but I just don't see it this year. I don't totally trust Derrick Henry a whole lot, their running back. And their wide receiver group is not the best. So I just don't think their offense is good enough. And quite frankly, their defense isn't that great either.
So I have their floor is 6-10 and their ceiling is 11-5. I do think they have potential. They showed up in games that were a little surprising last year. Like, they beat the Patriots and they stomped them. I mean, that was probably the worst or second worst loss the Patriots had last season. And I mean, they blew them out. They made the Patriots horrible. They have potential on their team. They're just so inconsistent, and it's hard to trust them. I'd venture to guess they go around that 9-7 mark. I don't. 8-8, 9-7. I don't really believe in them. Plus, I really don't like the Titans, so I have to take out that bias. But it's really hard for me to get behind the Titans when I'm just not a fan of really any of their players. Derrick Henry is lackluster. I mean, he had that 200-yard game, but that honestly was like 20% of his yards all season. Like, that game alone pretty much made his season. If you take that game out and give him his averages, his season's not that special. I mean, I know it's really fair to take out his best game, but that being said, I wasn't that impressed until the last 2 or 3 weeks. So just players to watch is Derrick Henry. Can he actually be a true running back, RB1? And can Deion Lewis back him up? Something to watch is Mariota versus Tannehill, because Mariota's going to get injured. He's pretty much been injured every year. It's almost a guarantee. Can Tannehill be probably the best backup in the league right now? Can he actually fulfill and play to the potential? Maybe. I don't know. A.J. Brown and Corey Davis, they're 2 probably wide receivers, that the main ones. Can they play well? Delaney Walker's coming back. They have offensive weapons to do it. I just don't believe in them. They got a tough schedule. AFC South in general does. I have a hard time saying they're going to beat the teams like the Falcons, the Saints, the Chargers. And they lost Lawan Taylor for 4 games, I believe, in the beginning of the season. And those are some of the more winnable games.
Yeah, I think Corey Davis for me is a big one because if he can be the number 1 receiver, because it's too much for me to ask A.J. Brown, the rookie, to be a number 1. I think Corey Davis has been there a couple of years. He needs to take that step. So if he can take that step and A.J. Brown can go behind him, they're interesting at their wide receiver, especially with Delaney Walker, the veteran tight end. So I think Corey Davis is going to make or break their season, honestly, because I think you're going to, even with Mariota or Tannehill, you're going to just have an average to a little below average quarterback. So if Corey Davis can be kind of what DeAndre Hopkins was for the Texans a couple years ago with all the quarterbacks that ran through Houston, I think that could make things interesting. I just am not high. I think they'll go 6-10 or 7-9. Like I just don't believe in them. But so going into some of their games that are big, I think Week 7 versus the Chargers, Week 10 versus the Chiefs, and most importantly, probably Week 17 at the Texans. Because who knows? What if they're going into the final week at, like 8-7 or whatever, and they need a win, at the Texans? It's a tough game for them, but if they need it, who knows? Maybe they'll play up to a high enough level to win that game. So, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I have the 2 Houston games versus Houston Week 15 and then versus Houston Week 17. Both big games, sort of division games. Really, any of the division games in AFC South are going to be big. That's just that. Chiefs Week 10, I mean, we saw them compete with some of the top teams last year. I feel like I just get this feeling that they could actually compete with the Chiefs for some reason. So, I mean, that's going to determine their season because, quite frankly, if they lose against the Chiefs, in my opinion, they're just out of it.
Yeah.
So, the next team.
Moving on to the final team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, for some reason, last year took a huge step down. They went 5-11, did not make the playoffs. They just really sucked toward the end, to be honest. Like, they just did. Like, they were so good the year before, almost making it to a Super Bowl, and then they just totally dropped off. So I have their 4 at 3-13. They're ceiling only at 6-10. I have a feeling they're going to be kind of like they were last year. I don't think their team that they had a couple years ago is possible to come back, even with the new quarterback and Nick Foles. So I'll let you talk about what you think, and then I'll go into players.
So I have their floor as a 5-11, and their ceiling is 11-5.
Wow.
So I'm actually a little bit higher on them. They do have the defensive players. We've seen them do it before, so they definitely have. They have a ton of potential with Calais Campbell, and Jalen Ramsey, AJ Boye, Nick Ngakwe. However you say his name, he's finally back from his holdout. So they have potential, and they drafted a defensive tackle last year, and they drafted a defensive end this year. So they really want that defense back to the level they had a couple of years ago. I don't think they really have any offensive weapons. I don't believe in DJ Chark and D.D. Westbrook, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, actually, I'll get into it now. Players to watch is the D.D. Westbrook and DJ Chark and really that whole offense. Yeah. They drafted DJ Chark in the 2nd round last year, and D.D. Westbrook, I believe, last year or 2 years ago, later, because he had some off the field issues. If this offense and Leonard Fournette can actually play to where they'll help. They'll help Nick Foles. I actually believe that their offense can be decent enough or good enough to where they'll give their defense a chance to win the game. But I don't believe in D.D. Westbrook. I don't think he's really good enough to take the team on his back or anything. I don't think Foles is elite enough or even that good enough to where he can elevate the wide receivers. And Leonard Fournette is good, but no one really knows with him. He's had injury issues. It's really hard for me to be positive about this team. I'm trying harder to find more positives than I am negatives, which says about this team. But then again, they have a ton of potential on their team. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I think I'm just really negative about this team. I don't know why exactly, but with Nick Foles coming in, he might be better than Blake Bortles, but I don't think he's going to be good enough to elevate, like you said, the receivers, Leonard Fournette, different guys like that. And then my other guy, so Nick Foles is one of my guys to watch, and Leonard Fournette is the other. What can he do? I just haven't seen it from him totally. I mean, he's good at getting touchdowns from the 1 yard line. Put him at the 1 and have him run. He's good, but other than that, I don't think he can be what he was when he was really good. And so that's just what I think about them. So some games to watch. I'll just go ahead. Week 1 versus the Chiefs. Good opening test. Will Nick Foles, how will they work together with the wide receivers? Week 10 at the Colts. It's a division game. I think that'll be a big one right in the middle of the season. And then week 13 versus the Chargers. Chargers are always going to be tough with I think the Chargers defense and the Jags defense are two of the best players. They have the best players on their defense. I don't know the most talented, but they have on both of those teams really good defenses. So we'll just have to see which team wins out, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I have versus the Texans week 9 in London. That's a big game.
That's true.
And they're really good in London for some reason. And this is sort of a big game for the Texans. But also, I think with Jags, I think the Texans are better than the Jags, and they need this win here. And they're going to have to seal this win. Because they go on a bye week the next week, and they can't end off on a loss going into the bye week. I just want to talk about this briefly about Nick Foles. Last year, we saw Nick Foles play in the beginning of the season, and quite frankly, I wasn't impressed by him at all. I wasn't impressed that he led the team. He had the magical run. He almost sort of had a magical run this postseason, but he had, of course, everyone knows about 2 seasons ago. I really don't believe in him in the regular season. I can't see him leading a team in the regular season to the playoffs. I have a hard time believing that.
Yeah, same with me. So that's the AFC South. We'll get you some other AFC divisions, and we'll go into NFC pretty soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.